I'm Ellie Hayland. I'm president of Humanists MN. For any new visitors or new members today, we're so glad to have you here. If you're new to humanism, I like to give a little crash course. Humanism is a secular community for ethical living. We're committed to the well-being of all and sustainability of the planet. We're a home for those looking for a community of naturally curious, compassionate, and rational people. And in short, we believe you can be good without a God. HMN is a very active organization. We organize primarily through Meetup, so please join us there to see our wide variety of upcoming events. And we are an all-volunteer nonprofit, so we depend on the service and generosity of our members and friends to further our mission. We have many volunteer opportunities such as marketing, media and tech, membership, programming, and social action. You can learn more about these opportunities at the info table in the lobby, and you can chat with me or Audrey Kingstrom, who you're going to hear from in a minute. We'll be out there during the social hour as well. You can also go to our website at humanistsmn.org to learn more about us or to explore ways to get involved. And there you can also support us by becoming a dues-paying member. Just a little bit of housekeeping. Restrooms are out the doors and to the left, or downstairs and to the left as well. After the speakers or the panel discussion, there's going to be a Q&A session, and then we'll have our social hour around 4:30. So please stay and socialize and get to know others. We'll be providing food and drinks, and we encourage you to please consider contributing with a donation to help us cover our costs. And lastly, there will be photo and video today that may be used for promotional and marketing purposes in the future. Up next, Christine Requa from our Humanists in Action team.
Thank you, Ellie. I am co-chair of Humanists in Action with my good friend Marcy, and we want to be in action. In addition to the community service efforts we organize, the other part of action is electoral or legislative, including local. And that relates to school board. So we think of the big news of what happens nationally, and that's important. We can make more of a difference locally. State, city, school board, fewer votes and voices make a difference. So if you want to see a humanist world, a world that treats everyone so they can all thrive, be engaged. In whatever way you choose, we offer to help that. Marcy and I put together alerts about some activities that we suggest you vote on that's usually statewide. Please do sign up in the sign-up form at the table in the front. We would love to encourage you and let you know about some things going on, including medical aid in dying. That is actually finally seeming to make some progress, where we will have a choice in how the end of our life looks as much as we can. So please do sign up. Let me know if you have any questions. And now, Audrey. I forgot the most important part. Yes, there's a newsletter, but also we have postcards, and we do that throughout the legislative session, where we encourage particularly state-level legislators to do something. In this case, it's join the Secular Values Caucus. You can have your belief system legislator, legislate for all, and that's what we're asking for. And later we'll have, and another postcard in the future will include perhaps some bills that we are encouraging that be passed that align with humanist values. So please do come by. We will look up your legislator if needed, and we'll mail those so you can tell them what you think. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Audrey Kingstrom, Program Coordinator, which is a volunteer position, but you know, it sounds good. I'm a Program Coordinator here at Humanists MN. And we do a lot of programming. And just to highlight sort of some of the expansive programming we do, we have, I think, something for everyone. We have a variety of book clubs. We have a grief group, a smart recovery group, a mindfulness group. We do social activities, service projects, which Christine mentioned, and our advocacy work, and have lots of lifelong learning opportunities. Again, all with that secular humanist perspective. And so, as Ellie mentioned, we use Meetup as our promotional tool and calendar, and if you have any trouble with that, I'll be also at the membership table, and I actually brought my computer today, so if anyone wants to help looking something up or want to know how to navigate anything, I'll be there to help with that. One other event that we're busy planning, and Suzanne, do you want to raise a hand, is our Day of Reason, our Minnesota Day of Reason, which will be May 1st. We do a reason breakfast, not a prayer breakfast, we do a reason breakfast for our legislators. And if you'd like to know more about that or get involved with it, speak to Suzanne. But most of all, save the date. It's a Wednesday, and it'll be a Wednesday morning at the Capitol. And so if you put it on your calendar and can take off from work or whatever, we'd love to have you there for that. Again, stop by the membership table to sign a postcard to encourage our legislators to keep religion out of government. Thank those who have signed up to be part of the Secular Government Caucus. That's the way our government is supposed to be. I'm a former civics teacher. I have a real passion for this. Our government is going astray today. Also, for those of you who maybe didn't make it or didn't have available cash last month, our speaker, Bradley Onishi, who was here speaking on Christian nationalism and is author of a book about that and was selling it there. We have a handful of books left, and again, at the membership table afterwards, if you're interested in purchasing that book, you may do so. Again, we have many things going on throughout the month. A couple of things here in this building, the first and third Saturdays of the month, but elsewhere out in the community in libraries and coffee shops, etc. And so, but once a month though, we have our guest speaker series right here, or panelists as we do. Next month, we are having Valerie Tiberius, who is an author and University of Minnesota philosophy professor, who will be here discussing well-being, and that is so important. That's really part of our core values, is really helping people flourish and living our best lives. And she will be talking about well-being and values and how living out our values really plays into how we see ourselves as living well. And that will be March 23rd. That happens to be the fourth Saturday because there was a conflict here at First Unitarian Society on the third Saturday, but also there's 5 Saturdays in March, so it was sort of an easy sliding for one month. Anyway, with today's program. Today we are talking about schools and the culture wars, and our member, Lisa Goddard, will be moderating our panel today. And so, Lisa, I'll hand it over to you, and you can let people know what's going on and introduce our speakers for today. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Lisa Goddard. I'm a Humanist MN member. My husband, Mitch, in the back of the room there, is HMN's vice president. I'm a civil engineer with the city of Minneapolis, and I'm a product of public education. In 2022, my friend and neighbor, Collin Beachy, a longtime special education teacher for the Minneapolis Public Schools and a participant on our panel today, took his incredibly strong passion for education and made the bold decision to run for an at-large seat on the Minneapolis School Board. At-large. That's a lot of people to try to win over. Collin, to my surprise, asked me to be his campaign manager, even though I knew nothing about campaigning. So we both got a crash course in campaigning. I'm proud to say that he won his election bid, garnering over 68,000 votes, which was 13,000 more than the second place finisher in the at-large race. In my role as campaign manager, I was exposed to the forces and organizations that see education less as a tie that binds society together, but see it more as a battlefield. A battlefield that we are addressing at today's community meeting as Schools in the Culture Wars. We are joined by 3 panelists, as noted, Collin Beachy. We also have former Anoka-Hennepin School Board member Nicole Hayes, and Chris Williams, the press secretary for Education Minnesota. Education Minnesota is a nonprofit organization that is a leading advocate for public education in Minnesota. So I'm going to introduce all 3 of our panelists, and then Chris is going to set the table for our discussion. So in no particular order other than alphabetical, I'm going to introduce our panelists. Collin Beachy is a 30-year educator who spent 24 years as a public schools teacher in Minnesota. Collin grew up in Staples, Minnesota, in a family of educators. This fueled his passion for public education, and he graduated with a BA in elementary education and coaching from Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota. He followed that with an MA in autism spectrum disorder from Concordia University in St. Paul. Collin became a special education teacher to change lives. His current position includes being a special education teacher at Focus Beyond in St. Paul. Until January 2023, he was a teacher and equity lead at Transition Plus Services in Minneapolis Public Schools for 8 years, and prior to that, he taught elementary school in Bloomington, Minnesota. He has also worked as a 4-sport coach and as a student life coordinator at Central Lakes and Minneapolis colleges. Elected to Minneapolis Board of Education in 2022, he is now its chair. So Collin lives with Mark, his partner of 11 years, and their adorable dog, Hijinks, in Minneapolis. Nicole Hayes began board service after an appointment in 2015 to represent District 5 in the Anoka-Hennepin School District. Following her appointment, she won 2 elections, serving a total of 9 years on the school board. Her service included 4 years as school board vice chair. As vice chair, Nicole represented the school board on a number of advisory committees, 2 of which were the Curriculum and Instruction Advisory Committee and the Labor Management Committee. She was also a representative on a number of boards, some of which were the Tribal Nations Education Committee, the Anoka-Hennepin Education Foundation, and the Association of Metropolitan School Districts. There's a lot more, but I could have gone on for a long time talking about all the different things that she's been involved with. She was recognized as a state leader for school board members and served as a member of the Minnesota School Board Association Board, MSBA, set to receive the President's Award at their upcoming conference. She also received the Director's Award and Leadership Development Certificate from MSBA in 2019. As Vice Chair, Nicole was a featured presenter at the MSBA Leadership Conference and Consortium of State School Board Associations at their national conference in 2023. Nicole was the school board representative on the Minnesota Teacher of the Year Selection Committee and on the MSBA Student Scholarship Committee and Delegate Assembly. Her husband, Tom, she and her husband, Tom, now live in Bloomington with their 2 dogs, and they also have 2 adult children. And then finally, Chris Williams was a journalist with the Associated Press and other publications for 20 years before joining Education Minnesota as its press secretary in 2012. Since then, he has had a leading role in developing the Union of Educators' external communications with the public, including its research into public opinion on schools and other topics. Since 2021, he has been the union's communications point person for resisting the national MAGA campaign to limit what students may learn in school and to restrict which students may bring their authentic selves to school every day. He is a graduate of Macalester College, class of 1992. He and his wife will be celebrating their 30th anniversary this year. They have 2 kids. And I also want to bring up that his parents, I don't know if recent is the right word for it, but his parents became Unitarian Universalist members at their church down in, or congregation society down in Texas. And so his parents are always very happy to see when he's presenting in front of the Unitarians. So I just want to also then follow up with a little personal thing here. So when I attended, when I was on Collin's campaign, I attended a virtual training presentation that Chris gave in 2022. It was enlightening, it was shocking, and frankly, it's the reason that we are here today. And so now let me hand it over to Chris to describe how the debates over public education are playing out on a national stage. Thank you. Let's welcome Chris.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you for giving me this opportunity, like she said, to get in good with my parents, who are Universalists just outside Houston, Texas. Also, I'll just add, since everyone else seems to have a Bloomington connection, I live in Bloomington, and both of my kids are graduates of the Bloomington Public Schools. In a lot of ways, we are here today talking about this because Donald Trump lost his re-election. And he lost his re-election in a very specific way. Set aside the nonsense about the Venezuelan government hacking voting machines and that sort of stuff. What he lost is he lost the suburbs of the battleground states in Minnesota and the upper Midwest. And you can't win the presidency if you don't win the suburbs in these key states. And he kind of knew this. He spent the end of that presidential campaign flying into states like Michigan and Wisconsin, doing these sort of dog whistle appeals about to the suburbs. You might remember us talk about property values, talk about public safety, that sort of thing. Well, after he lost, the Republican National Committee very quickly came through with a report that said, hey, you know what, you got to win the suburbs. And it wasn't too long after that that a lot of the very smart folks within the particular wing of that party decided, thought about what can we do to appeal to the suburbs, particularly the women in the suburbs who turned against us. And they went back to the playbook they usually use, which is to find a way to blame some black people. And that's how we came with the critical race theory. Does everyone remember that term? I see a lot of nods. So we had critical race theory, and that was developed as a political weapon by a guy named Christopher Rufo at the Manhattan Institute, amplified by another group called the Heritage Foundation. And he gave an interview to the New Yorker about that time where he confessed that he came up with this phrase mostly because he thought Americans didn't like the word critical, he thought they were optimistic. He thought that Americans didn't like to talk about race and that they were practical rather than theoretical. And I bring that up because he was really stringing three trigger words together to use as a political propaganda tool more than ever talking about the actual thing that was happening in schools. And that's a theme we're probably going to come back to a few times today, where we see this national campaign and the allegations about what's happening in schools are often very divorced from what the real life experiences are of teachers and students within public education, whether you're in Minnesota or any of these other states. So they kind of hooked onto this, they took this critical race theory, they put it into the master narrative that's been used for a while, which was to find economic anxiety among folks, use racial animus to inflame that, to inspire disgust in government, including at schools, so that, frankly, we can get lower taxes. That's one of the reasons why corporations put so much money into these foundations and these campaigns. And it also worked very well with one of the biggest groups within that coalition, which is a particular variety of religious folks who really want to see public schools replaced with vouchers for private schools that can and do discriminate. So that's how this whole thing started. It really started about winning the suburbs because it was part of this national political machine. So by July of 21, critical race theory was called the number one cultural issue to win back the suburbs. And it's a big headline across the McClatchy news services. And that sort of played out in 21 in Minnesota, which is really where I started to get involved in all of this. Because we started to see groups like the 1776 Pact, which was a brand new political action committee that was created nationally just to win school board seats across the country. It largely to restrict what students can learn, and it later sort of transformed to be really, really venomously anti-LGBTQ. And in Minnesota, we saw that was coming in. We saw a group called the Center of the American Experiment, you might be familiar with, which is a right-wing think tank, started to get very involved in these issues. We saw the Minnesota Family Council, which is a faith-based group, also start to get very involved in these issues. They were pushing messaging through some of their congregations. We saw things happening in political school board races that were a whole different issue set that we'd ever really seen before in Minnesota. And that's when we sort of countering it with Education Minnesota, which is the labor union of teachers, but we're part of a national group. And we work for this thing called the race-class narrative structure, which is really about developing messaging and the public argument for cross-racial solidarity for stronger public institutions, whether we're talking about schools, whether we're talking about cities, even all the way up to the legislature. And so in the 21 school board races, what we saw was that our version 1.0 of this campaign we called Freedom to Learn largely beat the 2021 version of this MAGA critical race theory. They didn't win very many seats, and there were about 300 seats up that year. So then we saw in 22, there was this regrouping. And it happened around the country, and it happened here too. Christopher Rufo, who I mentioned before, gave an interview to the New York Times in which he said, you know what, I've looked at data, and I really think that the racial animus of America is actually less intense than the anti-LGBTQ, particularly trans animus in America. And so that's when we started to see the CRT start to fade to the background. We started to see more of this talk about gender studies. And we started to see gender studies. It's the gender agenda, it's the gay agenda, it's this, it's that. Fox News is cranking this thing out. We're seeing books. It's on the Daily Signal, it's on Breitbart, it's on Alpha News, right? It's going out through that right-wing media thing. And then we also see organizationally some things changing in Minnesota. We started to see in Minnesota the creation right around in January, February of something called the Minnesota Parents Alliance, which was created by the Center of the American Experiment to push these issues in school board races. It was a woman who was put in charge of it was, I believe, a homeschool mom who didn't even have kids in public schools. And we started to see the branding of this change now to talk a little bit more about curriculum transparency plus gender ideology. And we had in 22, this was happening, it sort of went to the legislature. Some of you may remember some of the news stories about this where Republican lawmakers were saying teachers should not be allowed to teach things that the parents don't know about, which was a national talking point, which sort of fell flat in Minnesota because by law, as my teacher friend here can tell you, everything that happens in a classroom is public information. Most teachers spend a lot of their time trying to get parents more engaged, not hide things. And so once again, these national talking points ran into reality and fell a little bit flat. All right, but that was Minnesota. At the same time, things were going a whole lot different in other states. Places like Texas, Florida, Iowa, the South, Tennessee. They were picking this up and it was turning into legislation. So right now in America, about 1/3 to 40% of the kids are studying in a school that has a gag order on what they can learn about the racial history of America, about whether they could ever read a book that might have a gay character in their library, and that sort of thing. And a lot of this stuff isn't subtle. There was a group called Moms for Liberty, who some of you may have heard, introduced some legislation in Tennessee to remove middle school level books about Martin Luther King. And one of the objections they had to it was the portrayal of Bull Connor. And if anyone knows your civil rights history, Bull Connor was the sheriff who put the fire hoses on the civil rights movement. And they said that that was going to be prejudiced against law enforcement. Kids shouldn't read that book. It was never about what actually happened. It was about controlling a hit narrative about history for political purposes. So anyway, so now we're going to run through 2023. Because the 22 elections came around, none of this stuff really landed in Minnesota for the school boards either. So now it's 23, and now it gets to be really serious. This is just last year. Because last year it was 30 school boards, mostly in the suburbs. In the suburbs in Minnesota, just like you can't win the presidency, you really can't win the governor's race if you don't control the suburbs politically in Minnesota. You can't really control the House, you can't really control the Senate. This is sort of the battleground districts, and there was a big overlay between what looked like in school boards and what looked like in legislative seats. So in 23, we saw this sort of coordination that we'd never really seen before in Minnesota between some of these, what I'm going to loosely call MAGA groups. This was the Minnesota Parents Alliance, but it was also a group called the Child Protection League. The Child Protection League is on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of hate groups. They started to team up. There's a group called Restore Minnesota, which would probably fit most people's definition of a white Christian nationalist organization. We saw Mass Resistance, which is another group on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of hate groups. We saw the Minnesota Family Council. We saw a few units of the state GOP. And they started to really intensely working on these school board races, carrying these culture war issues into these campaigns. At the same time, we had this group called American Majority. And American Majority was working behind the scenes with some of the big funders in the state to convince conservative voters to sort of give up the notions of fraudulent early voting and vote early. So we're talking about changing the pattern of how people vote. And throughout all of this campaign, all of these groups were saying this was all about winning the House back next year in '24. This was essentially the dress rehearsal for all the work that they were going to happen in this calendar year we're seeing. Now all of this was happening. In Education Minnesota, we were firing up, and as you mentioned, we were doing trainings, and I went to every place I could find 12 voters together who would let me talk for 15 minutes at them. And we introduced and did our training from Freedom to Learn, but we also saw this really huge resurgence of people rejecting this agenda. We saw groups like the Bloomington Mamas, which rose up directly in response to book bans trying to happen in their school districts. We saw TikTokers who were became citizen journalists to uncover things, like our Holocaust denier running in Roseville. There was an actual person who was genuinely a Nazi enthusiast on the ballot in Roseville. We saw Proud Boys, who were behind the January 6th insurrection, were active in the 196 elections down in Apple Valley. We saw some of the most overtly anti-LGBTQ candidates I've ever seen running in South Washington County, which is kind of out by Woodbury way. A lot of these were uncovered by social media folks. So we saw these folks growing up. We saw parent groups becoming very much more politically active and organized than we've ever seen before in Minnesota. There was one called ISD 200 Strong in Hastings, which was some folks who were just freaked out about the people who were on their ballot and decided they were going to come together and they were going to create a vehicle for raising money and spending it. And all of these sort of things came together. We saw, by the way, we saw conspiracy theories like we've never really seen before in Minnesota too. Not just the litter boxes that we've talked about, but wild stuff that mental health care in schools was going to be used for data mining to one day take away kids' Second Amendment rights. We saw wild claims that social workers were somehow working for George Soros and UNESCO and Bill Gates in order to manipulate the minds of kids. Crazy, crazy stuff. And national speakers were brought in by some of these groups to spread it. And I know that I'm going on a little bit long, but the story has a happy ending because after all of this stuff happened, the votes were counted in November, just a couple months ago, and the union-endorsed candidates, which are broadly speaking in favor of the sort of ideals of public education, which is an effective education that is honest and welcoming to all kids, they won 85% of their races. And when they went head-to-head against these MAGA candidates, they won 80% of their races. It's not perfect, but it's pretty good. And our Holocaust denier in Roseville did not get a seat on the Roseville School Board, which we're also very happy about. And I'm just going to wrap up by saying we're going to be in 2024. We have 300 school board seats up again. That campaign we've talked about, which started about CRT and talked about curricular transparency, and which talked about gender ideologies, is now coalescing kind of around this phrase parents' rights, which is both as ambiguous and pregnant with meaning as the family values value of the 90s, if you guys remember that slogan. And right now we are gearing up at Education Minnesota and with our allies to compete for sort of this honest and inclusive education for kids all over the state. And I'm going to leave with a quick plug before we start the panel by saying, please, if you care about these issues, get involved in your local races. Every little bit counts. Every little donation counts. Everyone who volunteers for a campaign counts. And if you haven't thought about running for office, think about running for office. We need great candidates. All right? That's my plug and my brief history at a gallop, if that's okay.
All right, well, that was, like I said, it's kind of enlightening, shocking, and at the end, galvanizing, I guess. So thank you, Chris, for doing that great job summarizing the situation that's been going on at the national and state level. Now I'd like to bring it down to really the local level or the personal level, I guess, and ask Collin and Nicole if either of you have or would care to talk about an experience or experiences, a couple experiences that maybe you've had that highlight how the culture war has affected your work, either on the boards that you both have been on or as a teacher. And you each have your own mic, so it should just be on, so, yeah.
I guess, I don't know if you'd like to, you probably have more experience about than I would. Well, I guess I'm talking, so. Yeah, so listen, I've been on the school board now for just over a year, and so as I was speaking up here earlier, I think that one of the things that I'm lucky about is that I'm on the board in Minneapolis, and so therefore we have not really had a lot of these cultural issues coming at us yet. I think in the time that I was here very early on, I think a parent came up and spoke at a meeting about something about the gender-neutral bathrooms, but that was the only time that we heard from her. I do get some emails from time to time that are truly unhinged, and you go through them, and I'm not even really sure what you're asking for. You're just saying a bunch of stuff. But a couple months ago, we were talking about the MSBA, the State Board Association, and Chris and I were kind of rehashing that. But a couple weeks ago, we were down there, and there was a group that clearly, I don't want to say that they were from Moms for Liberty, but there was that type of a group that was aligned with those sort of values. And so they were trying to introduce the book bans and some of these hateful policies. And it's my first time there, so I just didn't really know how it worked, and so just sat back and listened. There were a lot of people that were pushing back on them, so I'm like, this is great, I really don't have to do this. They then came up with a proposal to students who are transitioning or students who are elementary school age thinking about being LGBTQ or whatever, you need to go on a special education 504 plan. And if you don't know what a 504 plan is, it's just basically one step before getting full special education services. So I lost it. And we have a school board member who's the parent of a transgender child. The city elected the first transgender school board member in Minnesota state history, so I'm not having it, right? So ended up having to just, kind of laid it out there, told the people kind of shame on you, and then I got reprimanded from making sure that I, keep my comments respectful. And so I had to go back and just say, you know what, listen, I'm not going to be respectful in the face of intolerance, just period. I'm not going to do it. Do whatever you have to do to me, but this is a dangerous, hurtful, and harmful policy. And I don't even know how it came to the floor. And so further discussions have come on, and the State School Board Association, one of their officers had reached out to me, and they are talking about changing some of their policies so that things like that shouldn't even be coming to the floor in the first place. So sometimes, a little explosion that I can have actually kind of can do some good. But once again, so far right now, like I said, we are a little lucky in Minneapolis, but it's right around us. Our school board member is a teacher in Bloomington. He was mentioning the book ban, so she's directly involved with some of that too. So, I'm hopeful that we remain strong with this, but one thing I would like to say about something what Chris and his organization is doing is something that I need us to see a little bit more of us doing as a community as well, is that we need to be on the offensive. It seems like we're always reacting to these right-wing attacks when they come out there. And so we need to go on the offensive with these and affirm our values and talk about why public schools are so important. Talk about the humanist values, about how you can be good without a God. Those kind of things are messages that we should be getting out to everyone and our students, and take all of this religion and hate and all. I don't know where it's all coming from right now. But like he said, I think it happened when Donald Trump first got elected and then lost the suburbs, and it's just getting worse, and people have been emboldened. And so I'm not sure exactly how to push back on some of that, but this is why I'm here, to also kind of hear from people like Chris and Nicole, and just people, everybody here, to just see how can we pull together and not only push back on this, but like I said, we need to be on the offensive with this, in my opinion.
Thank you, Collin. And thank you for the invitation to be here and to participate, and for all of you that are taking interest in your local school boards. When Lisa asked the question of, think back on a time where things just started to feel different, or that you noticed something was changing. And for me, the experience has been the redefinition of terms. The term critical race theory originated in the late 1960s at a conference in the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it was about how people of color were treated differently in our judicial system. There's also critical disability theory, and there are probably other critical theories as well. But that term became redefined by Christopher Rufo and others that saw an opportunity to use that for a greater political agenda. We're seeing it again with social emotional learning. That is another term that is being attacked, and that the definition that is being applied to it is nowhere near what our students need and what our teachers are providing. We're also seeing it with words like diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And somehow, people are being successful in redefining these words and getting others to follow and believe that they are something that they are not. So my frustration over the years has been, and I think Collin said it perfectly, is we're playing defense instead of offense. We need to, and I think that's how it starts in this room and in our communities, is we need to be very clear in what these words are and what these words mean and what we are intending to do in our schools for our children, how we are doing it, and why we are doing it. And it is for the greater good. There are wonderful quotes out there about the purpose of public education. And it's more important than ever that we give every student every opportunity to be successful, because we all want to be taken care of. We all want our cars serviced, or we want our lights to work. We want our doctors to know how to take care of us. And we want this next generation to be even better than ours. But I really have found that this, the redefining of terms, and it's fascinating if you could fly above as a sociologist and kind of study what's happening. It's less fascinating when you're living right in the middle of it. And it becomes more challenging when something like critical race theory has the same letters acronym as culturally responsive teaching. So all of a sudden, culturally responsive teaching became equated with CRT, which now the public was thinking is critical race theory. The two couldn't be more different. But again, that's where we're playing defense instead of offense. Collin had mentioned, getting involved in your local, or Chris had mentioned getting involved in your local school boards, considering running. I would also encourage you to be involved and knowledgeable about what's going on next door. So in Minneapolis, things might seem like, okay, they've tamped down the culture wars. They're doing okay. They are able to continue with their DEI efforts. They're able to continue to meet student needs so that students are attending school, that they are being seen, that they are being valued, that they are being challenged, and that they are going to receive the highest level of academic success that they are able to achieve. That might not be true when you get a few miles outside of your area. So the Anoka-Hennepin School District, for example, has 13 communities, and it stretches from Brooklyn Center all the way up into the northern parts of Anoka County. Those are very, very different demographics. In many ways, that district represents, similarly to the state of Minnesota, whether it's socioeconomically, racially, and it's again fascinating if you could stay 10,000 feet up, but particularly difficult because people are absolutely convinced in their convictions that whether it's litter boxes in the schools or that you're grooming children, they believe that. So how do we, as rational, reasonable people, try to meet and have people understand that that is not happening? That if you look at a photograph of kindergarteners from any classroom in the state of Minnesota, would anyone look at that photo and point at a child, or 3 or 5, and say, these 5 shouldn't graduate? I don't think so. I think in Minnesota, we want all of our children to be successful. But the challenge comes when we have to be vulnerable enough to understand where our biases are, where the structures that are in place are keeping some children from being as successful as others. And that's hard work, and not everybody wants to do it. But I think it's a step that that educators have embraced, and the pushback is real. I'm getting a little off tangent, but it's again, I think going back to the redefining of terms and what do we mean and why and who is it for?
Yeah, and just to, I guess, re-emphasize that again, because as Lisa mentioned, I was the equity lead at my school, and we were teaching culturally responsive teaching. And I remember when I first started, I had said to my husband that, you know what, someone's going to equate this with critical race theory at some point. They're just going to see the CRT. And she is correct. If you have any understanding of what culturally responsive teaching is, it has nothing to do with I shouldn't say nothing to do, but it's not just about race. It is about knowing the culture of your school and the students who are in front of you and getting to know them as people and how your teaching reflects what's going on in their actual lives, to make teaching more so that they can see themselves in, here's why I'm getting an education, so that I can see myself moving forward. I can see myself coming back to Minneapolis and getting a job and helping my community. And to just have it be put into this category where I'm grooming students into doing something is just, it's crazy, some of the things that people are saying, but she's absolutely right. People believe some of the most outlandish things. I have a relative that I had the kitty litter stuff. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. You can't believe this. And even as you explain it and you can give facts and listen, if something like that were to happen, that would be all over the news. It would be all over social media. One school cannot do something that would violate district policy. It doesn't work that way. But people just stop short of thinking about the bigger picture and things, and it's just that quick black and white answer that they can get. Whatever the simple solution is that makes me feel better, that's what I'm going to run with. And so that's why we need to get back again, going on the offensive and defining what it is that we're doing here and the importance of making sure that we have a public education for all. These board members up at this MSNBA thing, it's almost like they feel exactly what she said. It's their job to be gatekeepers as to who gets an education and who doesn't. And that nothing could be further from the truth. If that's your mindset, you don't belong in a position where you're trying to be having control over, not control, but the policies of your students that you're trying to be teaching. And so, again, this is why I keep just saying, this is why we need to be the ones who are being on the offensive and defining what it is that we're doing.
And I'm going to follow up the whole thing about the some of these crazy conspiracy theories, and Chris and I were talking a little bit about this in the hallway before the event started today, but just how do you talk to people that voice these conspiracy theories about anything really, but about education in particular, since we're talking about schools and the culture wars? Like, how do you, I guess, not turn it into the equivalent of how the MAGA people deal with people they disagree with, but also try to shut it down, or I guess have a conversation that you can still be friends with the person afterwards, I guess, if you were friends to begin with. But I guess I'll throw it to Chris first, and then you guys can add in if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, this is probably one of the most common questions I get, particularly around SEL, which turned into a much bigger issue in 23 than I think we had thought about. But before I answer the question, one little bit of trivia. There actually is one school in America that has litter boxes in it, if you knew about it. It's Columbine. The trauma of that community from the shooting has resulted in a condition where sometimes little kids lose control of their bowels during shooting drills. And it's the only place in America that's ever been found for this to be true. But leaving that aside, when you hear about these crazy conspiracies, and there's the litter boxes, there's the furries, there's a whole nest of them around SEL. I go back to this advice that I read once from a Yale philosopher named Jason Stanley, who wrote a book called How Fascism Works. And he sort of dissects these conspiracies, which have a long history. Anti-Semitism, there's racist versions, there's all kinds of versions. And he really makes the argument that you shouldn't think of them as explanations or even claims of truth. You should think about them as smears against a community. So that when people are talking about litter boxes, they're talking about furries, they're not actually talking about what's real. They're saying, I just want to make a smear against mostly LGBTQ and trans kids, because I want to equate their slight difference with a whole level difference of otherness. So that when you debate these things, don't go down the rabbit hole with them. What you want to do is simply get back to, as we talked a little bit, talk about going on offense. So just simply say, you know what, there's no truth for that, but I personally believe our public schools should be safe and they should be welcoming for every kid. And they should all deserve respect, and they should all be able to bring their authentic selves to school and be treated well. And don't try to make them unthink this conspiracy that they have decided to believe. Think about it as a conscious choice. They have decided to believe it, and they have decided to spread it. You're not going to convince them on that. Bring them along to a more inclusive vision for what public schools can be. Frankly, you will be happier saying sort of things like that. You will probably not drive yourself crazy as you might trying to debate this sort of person on their terms. And you're probably going to do better for the sort of persuadable people who might be part of this conversation but haven't really decided yet. That's my little comms guy 2 minutes of advice.
Did either of you have anything you wanted to weigh in on that topic? Otherwise, I can turn.
You know, I think for the topic of public education is just keeping the focus on student achievement. Everyone wants student achievement. So once you're talking about individual students and the opportunities, and to take some of the inflammation away, to illustrate why student achievement isn't consistent and why there are predictable gaps in education, and what is our responsibility as a society to address those. So sometimes data can help. It can kind of take the facts from the fiction, not always, but you can try. And one other fascinating thing, when in Anoka-Hennepin, we would always do a community survey that was run by the Morris-Leatherman Association. One of the questions they would ask is, where do you get your information about the school district? And it's been fascinating over the years kind of what that trusted source of information is. And for any type of media, what is your trusted source of information? You know, do you turn on Fox News or do you turn on MSNBC? So it's, for schools, the trusted source of information, I hope, would be the district itself. And what the survey results had shown over the years was that more and more families' source of information was neighbors, was friends and family. It was social media, it was Facebook. So it was becoming less and less of a singular source, and it was going from the objective to the very subjective. So I think that continues to be a challenge, is where people are getting their information. And one other thought, and it has escaped. The last would be along the lines of parent involvement. And so thank you to the former and retired teachers in the room, and also to the current teachers as well. So thank you for your work. And can any teacher tell you in the history of time that parents were not needed and welcomed in the school environment? So this idea of parent involvement as a new concept is just baffling to me. It's being used as a political tool. It's not about involving all parents in their education, because are we talking about LGBTQ parents? Are we talking about parents of LGBTQ students? Are we talking about non-white parents? I mean, which parents are we really talking about? Because when we're advocating for parent involvement in the groups that are specifically centering their messaging and their fundraising on parent alliance and parent involvement, I don't know that all parents feel welcome in those spaces. So some of it is calling out some of these truths, and the other is being very clear about the intention and the shared goals of student achievement.
Yeah, and to kind of your last point, when you're talking about that, when they are saying parents, we know what parents they're talking about, because they talk about parents and then they talk about parents of color. They talk about parents, and they talk about parents with disability. You know, so we know what parents that they're talking about when they are there. And I really, to be honest with you, really liked what Chris had to say, though, too. It's just sort of, don't go down that rabbit hole. You know, this is what I believe, and here's why, and here's what I want to see our school district doing forward, or here's what I'm going to do moving forward. And just end it then, I guess, at some point. You know, sometimes if you can see if there is that opening where maybe there is room for some discussion, but again, sometimes when there is someone who is so far from the truth, it's like you have to spend a half an hour just to even get them to move, 2 inches from, towards what the actual truth is. And sometimes it can just be like, you got to believe what you're going to believe. You know where I stand.
Thank you. A phrase came up just a little bit ago that I don't know if many people in the audience know what that means, but I know you guys, Nicole said it and you guys immediately responded. Social emotional learning, I think I said that right. So why don't you explain what that is to the audience here? One of you.
I'll tell you about the polling and the comms we've done about it. But why don't you give the definition?
Well, okay, so, sorry. I don't know if there's really any kind of specific definition that I would give of it. I guess the way that I am approaching the social emotional learning here is that it's just that. We are understanding, especially now coming out of the pandemic, that the effects of what the pandemic has are really had a bigger effect on our students than we gave them credit for. So it's just even maybe little things like you're slowing some of the pacing that you have of your lessons, and so that you're not overwhelming students. It's things like making sure that we have the counseling time and not just going to go see the counselor, but the counselor is coming into your classroom and actually doing some sessions and some teaching with the students. And it's just a lot of those things to make sure that students are getting in touch with how it is that they're feeling, and know that they can come out there and you can't learn if you're feeling anxious. You can't learn if you're feeling frightened. And so how are we working with students to deal through some of those things before we can even get them to the point where they can sit down and read a book? So I don't know if that's the best definition for it, but it's kind of all-encompassing for me, the way that I apply it with my students. And so it's just again thinking about, I have a student that came to school one day. Obviously had a horrible night. Finally got to talk to him. He had mom's boyfriend beat her up over the night, and he and his brother had to kick him out of the house. And so it's like, this kid is not going to learn today. He's just not. So I have this big old stuffed gorilla, and I put it under my desk, and he just went there and he just slept. And it's like everyone's, there are people like, he's got to go to class. No. He's going to sleep. Just let him be. That's kind of the things that's social emotional learning. It's not going to be learning anyway if you force him to go to class. Just let the kid get a break.
I think to piggyback on that, a lot of social emotional learning is based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and there's also a group called CASTLE that has worked on defining the 7 tenets of of social emotional learning, which I can't remember the 7. I won't even try. But really, the premise is that students need to come to school ready to learn. And the fact is, not all students come to school ready to learn, for examples that Collin just gave. And whether it's the need for early childhood education or pre-K, birth to 3, whatever the needs are, but it continues. So that in elementary school, a student's social emotional needs might be about learning how to take turns. It might be about waiting for your turn to talk. It might be about knowing when to be quiet and when to speak. It might be, recognizing the feelings of somebody else. It might be learning how to take responsibility for making someone else feel bad, and then how does that make you feel? So that's at the elementary level. But then as students get into secondary, middle school, and high school, where adolescence is its own complicated mental health struggle on the best of days, but then part of social emotional learning at that level is teaching kids resilience, teaching kids problem-solving skills, teaching kids, one of our schools really talks about the power of yet. I didn't do well on that math test, yet. And building for students their recognition of their own body awareness, where they can feel their heart starting to race. They can feel their palms get sweaty and their fists tighten. But instead of whipping that pencil across the classroom at the teacher or a classmate, they're going to have another way to calm that down. Or in the best environment, you have a classroom teacher like Collin that has those resources built into the classroom. So when a student is feeling like I am going to lose it and everybody is going to suffer because of it, they have a space to go to. That's all part of the social emotional learning too, and those are lifelong skills. I mean, when you look at what employers want out of our graduates, they want students that work well with others, that have communication skills, that are going to be creative problem solvers. They don't need people that are going to, just kind of sit and obey the bells that they go off any 23 minutes or hour and 6 minutes. They need creative, independent, collaborative, creative thinkers. When we think about what our responsibility is in public education, which is to get every kid across that graduation stage, it's for the jobs of the future. And I think of an example of my daughter's roommate's brother had a job at TikTok. His job was writing algorithms for what are they? Okay, who's under 25 here? The filters. So these filters that you could do. Now, when this kid was in high school, 6 years before he got this job, could any of us imagine what that job was? I don't think so. Yet that's the task in public education right now, is we need to have kids ready for jobs that we can't even define, that we can't even imagine. So what skills can we build in our students so that they can be successful in what our employers need? And that really comes back to the core of the social emotional learning and all of the components that are part of it.
Yeah, and again, I know you need to jump in too, but just to piggyback on that again, that learning how to do some of these things, because again, I brought up the pandemic, so you have children who are supposed to be taking a year or two of learning how to take turns, how to sit in the circle, how to be right in the class. That didn't get that, and that's a year. When you're a young age like that, that's a lot of time. It may not seem like it for us now, but we remember that. Many of you have children. And so that carries on also into even just what you mentioning what our employers are doing. Again, we have a generation of a workforce who had spent a lot of time on the computer. And think about what we asked our students to do during this time. Everything had to be online. You always have to be on the computer. So what did they learn to do? They learned to start socializing online. Everything is on the computer. Now, we've been reading all these studies. We're right now going through the discussion about our mobile devices policy, and if we're going to ban them completely, or if there's some middle ground that we can find, or whatever. But we have all of these studies about what that has done to our students' brains, and how that's contributing some of the isolation that they have. So this social emotional learning is kind of helping bring some of that back with opportunities that they haven't gotten before. And to talk about preparing our students for the future, she's right. I mean, I have a 13. Okay, right? So 12 years ago, I barely remembered how to be using one of these things. Our students right now, our kindergarten students are going to be graduating in 2036. Are our school districts prepared for artificial intelligence? Are our school districts prepared for, they're talking about quantum AI right now. I don't know what that is, but it sounds scary. Okay, so
very much is, yes.
I mean, so this is what I'm saying. So what are we preparing our students for? And so sometimes having to take the time to have to go down these culture wars is really frustrating, because it's stopping us from doing the real actual work that we have to be doing.
So go ahead, Chris, because I'm fascinated, because it sounds like the social emotional learning thing, but I mean, that approach sounds like, why would anybody be opposed, right? So what is going on here?
Well, you get to be opposed if you are marinating in misinformation in a right-wing media ecosphere. If you were to go over and look up social emotional learning, and you've probably heard a pretty good definition, right? I mean, my short version is it's about teaching kids to recognize and control their emotions. It's about a whole suite of lessons so that kids grow up poised and self-confident in themselves. But there's a lot of little strands of that. But if you were to go right now to the Child Protection League, and don't look it up now, but 1 year later, you will see headings about the occult roots of social emotional learning. You will see equally strange claims about the concept of mindfulness as being something that's going to lead children off into strange beliefs. But if that's the only information you're getting, as someone had touched on, that's how you get down these sort of strange beliefs about things. And I think another part of it is that as we've kind of talked about this sort of rise of conspiratorial thinking, one of the things that's happened is that the amount of local newspapers and local news reporters has trailed off. There's a lot of communities that don't have anyone who covers the school board meeting, not yours, but you know. But Anoka is part of it. You know, I was doing a talk to some educators in Deer River just a couple days ago. And I said, well, what's the local newspaper? Our newspaper closed. Well, what radio station do people listen to? They don't listen to the radio. It's like, so what do people do? Well, you know, people pick their like XM radio station. And if you're picking sort of one of these MAGA reinforcing ideas, you never hear anything else. So maybe you do believe crazy stuff is happening in your schools because there's no independent source of information out there just saying what's happening. And that's kind of the media landscape we're in, and it's one of the challenges for getting truth and sort of our values out into the communities.
Okay, I have, I think, one more question here before I open it up to others to ask some questions. Yeah, so let me just toss this one out here and see where this goes. And maybe we've kind of already touched on it, but you know, so let's talk about more like long-established educational principles. How are these long-established educational principles being undermined in the current political environment?
Ooh, I can give you two. I can give you two. And one is something that Collin had said, which is really important. There is an opportunity cost to spending this much time and thought on these sort of tangential issues and not about helping the very real structural problems we have in public education. Right? Helping kids recover from the pandemic is a real issue. And, you know, reasonable people may disagree in the best ways, but everyone agrees who's in education actually working with kids that this should be a big focus, right? There should be a big focus on our continuing raising the academic achievement of our BIPOC communities, right? That's a real thing that we should be doing more of. But instead, we're spending an inordinate amount of time talking about this stuff and chasing phantoms. So anyway, that's one of them. The second one is I do think you phrase it in the negative, but also I think there's a positive possible. Because I think that this is an incentive to really give voice to why we have public schools and voice those ideals and the sort of the visions for what they should be. They can be better. They can. I mean, I work for the teacher union, and I'll tell you, they can be better. But if you can't articulate the vision and do it repeatedly and consistently, we'll probably never get there. So, yes, this culture war stuff is a problem, but it could also be turned into a way to build the case for public education and maybe even a better version for our kids.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I mean, this is what we were talking about when I was starting to run for the campaign. It's sort of, you know, we need to talk about why we are supporting public education. And, you know, I just believe that every child deserves a free and quality education. They should not have to go through an entry test. You should not have to have any religious thing put upon you. Everybody is qualified for a free education. And so we have to, right now, it's, you know, we're in Minneapolis, and obviously I think a lot of people might know that, you know, the budget crisis that pretty much every school district around the state is going through, and that kind of stuff is taking front and center right now. So there's just a lot of negativity. But when you go behind the scenes and start seeing some of the things that are going on in this community by our students, it is tremendous. And there's a lot that we can be proud of here. And so I want the new CTE center that's at North High School. we were on a tour there, and one of the people on the tour was saying, I feel like this is one of the suburb schools. There was the principal at that school had brought some of the elementary school kids there, and they were like, wow, are we still in Minneapolis? And yeah, that is showing what we can do here in Minneapolis. And so that's why we need to open our doors to everybody who is coming here. Now, we faced some specific challenges here. We've got a lot of people coming in now. The Ecuadorian students are on the rise because of what's going on in their country. And so we've got dual language programs that we need to double down on. But there are people in this community who are so passionate and so helpful with public education that we need to show people, here's why we are doing this. We are a state where we will educate your child. And that's the message that we want to get out there, no matter who they are. No matter what they look like, no matter what they speak, no matter who they worship, who they don't. They deserve a public education. It's really that simple, I guess, for me. So.
You want to define CTE? They might not remember.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the Career and Technical Education Center that's over at North, and there's going to be one at North just got built. They're starting work on Roosevelt, and then they will be doing one over at Edison. And it's more going back to focusing on a lot of the technical programs and the technical careers that you can have. And it's fantastic. It really is. There's this big brochure that's open to the public if you want to check it out and look at it. But it tells you if you want to go in the healthing career, here's which center you're going to go to. Here's the classes you can take. Here's the salary ranges that you might make. So it's a fantastic program. It's only in like its third or fourth year, but it's something that we're proud of. I know the students are proud of, and like I said, it's just something that double down because our students all deserve it. Period.
I guess just I was thinking right before Lisa asked that question. Boy, we're a bunch of downers up here. I mean, it was getting really heavy and not necessarily optimistic. So I'm glad for the question. I think, looking at the silver lining, if there is, or at least the glass half full, of this culture wars conversation is it is bringing people together to talk about it. We're here today. I was at another event earlier this afternoon for the same reason. Groups are forming to educate and train interested people to run for school board. I was once told, "You're so reasonable," and I thought, that's like the nicest compliment I've ever had. And could it be less exciting or sexy? But I'll take reasonable any day. There's a whole lot of reasonable people out there that really want to make sure that our schools continue to provide what is needed for our communities. And when I have had the opportunity over the past 9 years to sit with our students, that's when I have the greatest hope and optimism, is if you have the opportunity to sit with a group of high school students, they get it. They're not gonna pick up this nonsense and run with it. They just won't. They're passionate, they're compassionate, they have just a heart for equity and justice. They want people treated fairly. They want to make sure that every kid has the same opportunities that they do. And you've seen it in some of the social media campaigns that this next generation will do in terms of voter turnout, or snatching tickets from a site so that it appears to be sold out, yet it's empty. They're smart, and they will find ways to get through this. The other thing that I think is coming out of this is a chance for communities to really establish what is important to them. And I saw a recent article about property values in Florida. And it was just kind of this inventory of houses for sale that were expected over a year's time is in a matter of months. And is that, we can speculate, but is that reflective of what's going on in the state of Florida? Are people feeling that this isn't where I want to raise my family? And, where you see businesses making decisions about where they are investing in their infrastructure and for their employees. So I continue to hope that good prevails. And again, I think back to that picture of a kindergarten class. Which one of these kids doesn't deserve to walk across the graduation stage?
Thank you. Now I can open it up to the audience, and if you can come up right up here, we've got a microphone, and Ellie will.
Well, I'll just talk loudly. Q&A time. I just wanted to thank you guys for coming and sharing your thoughts and expertise. And I did want to say, Nicole, you're talking about reason, and you being complimented on being a reasonable person. We're humanists. Reason is our thing. It's our jam. So you're among friends here. So for questions, we have a few minutes for questions here, just so we can get through everyone who has a question. Please keep them succinct, not comments disguised as questions, so that we have time to hear from them and get their feedback. So, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Dixie. This is my first meeting. One thing I hope you guys would address as far as culture and schools, and I'm 100% on board. You haven't addressed a fine point. That is trans girls in sports competition with biological girls. And I have a problem. I'm presenting myself. I don't know if I'm for it or against it. What I'm saying is I'm ignorant on it. I am unlearned, and I present myself with an open mind and an open heart to learn, to have my biases checked. It's very convoluted for me because I'm a gay woman, and I'm in the community, and I feel pressure to have an opinion, and I don't. So teach me. Is it okay? What's going on? How am I supposed to feel? I'm not a biological mother, so I don't have the parental experience. But should trans boys be able to compete with genetic females? Are we cool? Peace?
Yeah.
Okay.
You want me to go? You're going to go.
Sure, you can.
Oh, okay. I'm not going to tell you how to feel.
Exactly.
So I will tell you how I feel. I think this is an issue where there's a disconnect between the reality and the fear. And I think it's also an opportunity to talk about the purpose and the reason for co-curricular activities in our high schools. And I'm just going to talk about high school. I'm not going to talk about college or anything beyond that. So the purpose is of students participating in co-curricular activities. For me, it's about student engagement. If students are engaged in what's going on at school, they're going to show up, they're going to get an education, and they're going to graduate. Then there's the perception about competition. So in your example or your question about a transgender girl participating on a traditionally girls team, and we can use any example if you want to use hockey or basketball or soccer or whatever it is. So there is this belief and this perception that you have different abilities based on your biology, right? You can run faster or you can jump higher, and some of those things are proven to not be true over and over again when you look at the highest level of athleticism. But I think for me, the greater question is about the purpose of the activities and how it benefits all students. So does it mean that a student is displaced on a sport? Not necessarily. Does it mean that more kids get to participate and to be engaged in their education? I believe so. And also, I don't think that the numbers really pan out to what the fearful media and mindset will tell you. Also, I think if you have the opportunity to talk to a transgender girl and ask about, well, what do you enjoy doing? What are your activities? What are your interests? That this may or may not be of something that is of concern to them. But that the danger in so much of this, and it just, I can't remember the state it just happened, but it was a student that was successful so somebody immediately questioned her gender. And just the damage that does to children. I mean, these are children, and public education co-curriculars are not about creating the next, Dorothy Hamill or LeBron James. They're about getting kids to the next phase of their education. So I feel that it's really important that every student has every opportunity to participate in the activities that are going to make them most successful.
Especially with now in some states, some schools are trying to say teachers or gym teachers or counselors can check the genitals of these students. Have you heard that?
Yes, it's Florida.
Of course it is.
There's probably a meme about, yep, that's Florida, right? Yeah, and I think the other part of that too is some of the assumptions that are made, and I remember saying at a school board work session years ago is, we don't have genital detectors in our schools. And if a student comes to your school and they are introduced and this is who they are, this is who they are. That is their truth, that is their being, and we should welcome all of our students and help them be as successful as they possibly can.
Yeah, I don't, to be honest with you, have much more to add than exactly what she had kind of said. And I think that, again, we need to keep focus on what we're doing here. When you have a foreign exchange student come over and they talk about what goes on in the United States, they are actually shocked at how much emphasis we put on our high school sports. And listen, my brother was a very good football player. He went to college. His first game of his senior year, got hit from the knee and he was done for the season. Now, there was a chance he might have been able to go pro, but he was done. But he still has his education. He's now a doctor, right? So life goes on after sport, and people need to understand, if someone wants to be, do you know how good you have to be to get to that highest level? I mean, there are people that are sitting on the bench on an NBA team that are very, very, very talented basketball players. And it's a very slim chance of what things are going to be done there. And so it's more important about making sure that this person is showing up and has an opportunity to engage in a sanctioned activity.
I'll just also add, I think transgender students are also being used as a scapegoat, and it's a total fear kind of campaign. If you're going to use the example of Susie losing her spot to Terry on the team, well, Susie, maybe was going to lose her spot to a freshman. So, it's just dressing. It's fear.
First of all, thank you so much for a very excellent discussion. I want to read a headline to you. After lawsuit threat, St. Louis Park Public Schools will allow Somali families to opt out of LGBTQ plus books. And they were aided in this lawsuit by a group called the Texas Liberty Institute. This is a group that's going around the country filing suits to protect what they call religious liberty when it's someone who's trying to sort of discriminate against especially LGBTQ groups. And one of our missions is separation of religion and government. So this kind of thing, is disturbing to us, but I'm just wondering if you're seeing this in other places around the state. Are the MAGA types kind of cultivating religious immigrant groups for their cause?
Short version is there's at least one other school district where a similar situation is happening. To your question about are we seeing this in other places, the Minnesota Parents Alliance, which I had mentioned earlier, posted something on one of their social media channels asking parents to opt out of material they found objectionable or divisive or some word like that, which is really code for don't let your kid read things that your parents might not want them to know, right? And puts an enormous burden, probably an impractical one, on teachers to decide in advance what might be inappropriate and how am I supposed to tell parents that? And is it really my place to tell you what you think or might think. So yeah, it's a thing, and it might turn into a bigger thing, and if it does turn into a bigger thing, it could be very disruptive just for how the schools will operate, which is probably potentially the goal.
Yeah, I was just going to say it is very challenging. In Minnesota, parents always have the right to opt a student out of a lesson. I think this is just escalating that option for some national attention, but it does bring about much bigger questions as well. And I think every parent, almost every parent would say, I don't want another parent telling me how to raise my child, yet a parent is telling another parent what their child should or shouldn't have. So it becomes a very interesting issue, but I agree with Chris. I think it could be bigger. I remember trying to opt my kids out of the DARE program. You know, I mean, it was just kind of, you know, it's, I think it'll keep coming.
Earlier you said don't follow the conspiracy theorists and argue with them down into the rabbit hole and take what Michelle Obama said, you know, the high road. But conservative political groups around the country are very organized, and they produce talking points and they spread them around. Do we have any talking points? Is there a place where we can get those for you know, the positive side to help those of us that don't have all the experience in the school systems, that we can say, oh, okay, when you said it, I said, oh, that sounds very reasonable. Now, how do I remember that? So are there places for those?
Oh, thank you for asking. Yes, so there is a campaign called Freedom to Learn, which I am a big part of. And Freedom to Learn literally produces messaging guides for how to talk about many of these issues. We just produced a new one in the last couple of months, all about SEL, trying to capture at least some of the weird conspiracies, but more importantly, giving people workable definitions for what it is, why it is, and why it's beneficial. The Education Minnesota website has got a sign up for these things. It's under the advocacy section, and you can sign up, find Freedom to Learn, and I or someone else in my office will send you what we got.
And I'd encourage you to take advantage of some of that, because it's the exact same thing that I was asking Chris earlier. You know, Moms for Liberty has a playbook. Well, where's our playbook? You know, and so if there are things that are out there, I encourage people to go ahead and take advantage of them.
When the critical race theory issues were coming up, the American Bar Association put a section on their website specifically addressing what critical race theory is in the legal environment, and then what their statements were as well. I believe the University of Minnesota Law School did a similar, or maybe used it. But the resources are out there. But you're exactly right, and this is part of the playing defense instead of offense. And it's harder to get people to rally around what we've come to experience as, you know, a moderate middle place to be. But I think we need to get better.
Yeah, and you know, I guess the part of the playing defense too, the hard part about it is you don't know which crazy direction they're going to go in next. So you can't. It's hard to anticipate, you know, who's next. You know, but still, once we know some of these, just, you know, stay on the offensive, and again, bring it back to, this is why I believe in public education, and it's about our kids.
Okay, you talked a lot about the role of public education being to prepare students to participate in the economy, to have good careers and jobs, and I agree with that entirely. But there's another role of public education in democracy. It's to prepare them for citizenship, discharge their responsibilities as citizens. I didn't really hear that discussed, and it's concerning to me because I feel our country's democracy is under threat. We've got a sizable number of people in this country, probably not a majority, but close enough to be scary, who will support a candidate who actively says, I only accept the results of elections if I win. And it's not just old people like me, there are young people as well who've just come out of our public school system who either support the candidate or are not bothered by the fact that his views are utterly undemocratic. So my question is, are we doing enough in our public schools to prepare students for citizenship. It used to be called civics. I don't know what it's called now, but somehow it looks like the message isn't getting through, because I don't see where people are really concerned, where students coming out feel a real commitment to democracy, to the country, to the fundamental principles this country is based on. Aren't we getting the job done? Could we do a better job? What about that?
Well, I think there's a lot of questions in there. There are many, many teachers in education who would say the primary goal of public schools is citizenship. It is, our phrase that we often use is to live and lead in a more multicultural, multiracial Minnesota than we've ever had before. Whether that's getting through and every kid who is coming out is going to believe that, no, because really the role of education is really, you're inspiring citizenship, but you're not telling kids exactly what to think, particularly in a political context. And I think that's a ball that everyone wants to keep their eye on a little bit. Could we do more citizenship? Yeah, I mean, sure, but we've also got a lot of pressure to do the career technical education. And we also have a lot of focus on standardized test scores, which really are kind of distant from a lot of the things you're talking about. And those test scores and the chasing of them is kind of in federal law, and we have to really sort of push back against some dominant policies in order to do the things that a lot of educators think are the most important.
So yeah, I appreciate your question. I've been thinking about some of this as well. First of all, can we do better? We can always do better about everything. So I just lost my train of thought. I'm so sorry. No, so in terms of, I really did just lose my train of thought to try, and I'm sorry. Could you jump in? Maybe I can collect my thoughts. I don't know if you had anything to say.
I don't disagree with your statement, but I don't know if it's reflective of a lack of what's being taught versus the swirling efforts around it. You know, when you're looking at the use of social media, other sources of information, where kids are getting that information, what feels urgent to them, what is either leading them to show up and vote, to volunteer, to lead, and what isn't. So it's, as far as what's taught in the classroom, I mean, just to be dry and boring, it's all related to the Minnesota state standards. And there are standards for civics. The social studies standards are being rewritten now too. That's where, you know, when we say what is being taught in schools, that's it. That's what every Minnesota school has to teach, is to the state standards. And civics is in both, well, I think districts have some flexibility, but for Anoka-Hennepin, 9th grade and 12th grade. There are also, again, depending on a district's size and resources, lots of co-curricular activities, whether it's the Young Democrats Club or the Young Republicans Club, but then service groups and organizations as well. Again, I don't disagree, but I'm not sure that it's reflective of lack of what's happening in the classroom versus the extraordinary pressures and efforts that are outside of the classroom.
I guess, and back to the point that I was trying to make earlier, when this is just, I guess, on a bigger, much bigger scale. I keep bringing up the pandemic, but I think if you take a look back, that any time that there's been some large global disruption, something has been changed and society changes, and I think that we may be just at the start of some of that. But I think the most important thing that you mentioned was about the fact that how is our education system set up right now? We are set up to make a bunch of corporate citizens. That's how I feel sometimes we're trying to just reproduce people to make sure that they are keeping our economy going, but we're losing that sense of citizenship and things like that. And so how right now in Minneapolis, we're going through a whole transformation of things. And so those are things about how are we bringing the sense of community back into our education as well. And so some of our social studies things that we will be doing are going to be a little bit more local that we're going to try. We do have those state standards, but even when you have those state standards, it's part of the critical, or the, not critical race theory, the culturally responsive teaching. Again, it's about knowing your students and knowing their community. And so part of that can be, again, where that citizenship comes in, just about knowing who is around you. He mentioned the place up in Deer River. When you lose some of those newspapers and you lose some of those things that are local, you lose that connection with the people who are around you, and all you're hearing are the larger pictures of where the fights are. And so when we come back to our public schools and start doing that again, having that sense of citizenship, and it's especially important in a district as large as ours, that is so diverse as ours, that people have an understanding that even though we've got all these schools all over, in District 6, District 2, District 3, whatever it might be, we still have to have one vision for Minneapolis public schools. And that is to make sure that we are serving the community and putting out positive citizens, not just ones that go and work, ones that can be well-rounded and can contribute to the community in any way that they can. Teaching, being the organ person, you know, starting up a startup business, whatever it might be. But understanding that this is a great place to be.
And so, real quick here, because I know we're running over, so I'm looking at the timekeeper, and I think we're done, or not?
Yes, we have to move on to the reception. We rent the space for a certain amount of time, so we do have to move on. Thank you so much for joining us. And if you didn't get to ask your question, if our speakers are able to stay for a little while, you can chat with them out there. Otherwise, we encourage you to talk amongst yourselves about what you learned today. But please do stay if you can. We'd love to have you join us for the social hour. So thank you for coming today.
So I'm on the committee. Oh, good. Yeah. I know the numbers back.